Welcome to Faith Formation Live. My name is Joseph. I'm one of the pastors here at First Pres, and this is Paul, and he is one of the pastors here at First Pres, and together, we, every Sunday, commit to 15 minutes of discussion about today's texts. And if you would like to participate at home with Faith Formation, we have resources for you on our resource website, fpcf.online. You can navigate to the Faith Formation link, and you can see all of the, every Sunday has its own PDF file with curriculum and an opportunity for you to read a little bit more and learn more about the texts. And so I know the curriculum today is focused on the gospel text, which Paul coincidentally focused on in his sermon. And so I'm going to ask Josh to put 15 minutes on the clock so that we can get our fun started. Paul.
If he doesn't do it, we get longer.
That's exactly right.
All right. Sounds
I
good.
see the clock,
Up
though,
there
so he
goes.
did it.
Oh.
Okay, Paul, you preached today mostly on Matthew, although there were some themes that were found in the other two texts you didn't mention explicitly, but I think were certainly borne out there. Tell me about your approach to the text. Why did you pick the gospel versus Isaiah or the Psalms? What captured you in preaching today?
I think part of what captured me was, one, Isaiah 45. Mm-hmm. Isaiah 45 is, if you haven't read Isaiah 45, not just the first 7 verses, read the whole chapter. Mm-hmm. It is power-packed, and it is a strong affirmation about the God who is creator, redeemer, sustainer, the God whom we love and serve, and who's revealed to the world through Christ. I mean, Isaiah 45 is just jam-packed. And kind of what first caught my ear was the fact that here is Cyrus, a non-Jew,
yes,
who God grasps by the hand in order to redeem not just God's people, but creation. It's like God is at work here in this Persian emperor, right, mm-hmm. to do God's work. Cyrus doesn't even know him. There's one verse there that says, though you don't even know me, I've got you by the hand, and I'm going to work in you and through you. And this is what goes in my mind on that is like, well, you got the Jewish hope to return from exile to their homeland. Mm-hmm. And here it is taking place through a human being who they would never really expect to have been the one to deliver. So it's like, and thinking back, most of them stayed right where they were. Mm-hmm. Very few returned to the homeland. So it was the first thing that jumped out. And then it got to me when I'm thinking about Matthew, and it's like, well, this is Tiberius, and this is the coin that's given him. It's during Tiberius Caesar's reign as emperor, or rule as emperor. And so it's like, this is the coin, and that coin has that image on it, and that coin has the inscription on it. And in thinking about that, and thinking about Jesus' non-answer in some ways, and the context in which it was all found, chapters 21 and 22, and set it all up. It was like, well, that seems to be the way to go. So somehow, maybe God's working something through even Tiberius and those who are opposed to Jesus. You know, God has Jesus by the hand and is walking and working through him to bring deliverance and redemption to God's people and to the whole world. And how is God doing that, and how is it similar? That's kind of where it went. But
no, I think that's where it went exactly. Certainly in Isaiah 45 and even in Psalm 96, which we heard in worship today, the themes of sovereignty, kingship, authority. In the Psalms, it's God is coming to judge the earth with equity and righteousness, right? In Isaiah, I mean, you're right to point out far beyond verses 1 to 7, the entirety of the chapter, and even beyond, it's all about God's identity, and kind of making futile those questions that would maybe say, we can understand God, or we can know God, or we can apprehend God by our reason or intellect. It's sort of these texts sort of say, you have no idea.
That's right.
I'm in charge, and I get to do things. The repetition there in the first 7 verses, though, of I am the Lord, there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. Mm-hmm. That sort of spoken, like you point out, to a foreign leader who probably had his own pantheon,
Sure.
who had his own sense of what divinities were in charge. And I think back to in the book of Ezra, Cyrus issues an edict when the people are able to go back to Jerusalem.
Yep.
And in the edict, he makes the point that these are the people who worship the God who lives in Jerusalem.
Right.
Right? Like, so at that time, Cyrus's idea of Yahweh, of God, was a regional deity who took up residence in this city. And here God speaks to him and says, actually, it's a lot bigger than that.
It's a lot bigger.
I made everything, turns out, and there isn't any God, even in your pantheon, that's real. So,
Yeah.
mind blown.
Yeah.
Any
Any other God obtains power only through
Yes.
what I allow. Yeah, verse 18 in chapter 45 of Isaiah, "For thus says the Lord who created the heavens, he is God, who formed the earth and made it. He established it. He did not create it chaos. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, there is no other. I did not speak in secrets." It's like, I've revealed to you my word, what my word is. And you're supposed to be working to make creation a habitable space.
Yes.
And too often, as the Pharisees and Herodians, and we're right there alongside them, we want to take up issues that are divisive and want to divide and create inhabitable and inhospitable space,
Yes.
trying to trip one another up, trying to defeat one another, trying to be the ones with the right answers and have God's stamp of approval.
Yes.
And it's like, and Jesus says, look, man, wrong question.
Yes. Well, keep going in Isaiah 45. If you're down to verse 20,
Yeah.
It says, "Assemble yourselves and come together. They have no knowledge, those who carry about their wooden idols and keep on praying to a God that cannot save." Right? Like, there is no other God besides me. If we fast forward to the gospel text, really it seems like that's lurking behind Jesus' answer.
Yeah.
Is both these groups who came to him, Herodians and Pharisees, are carrying with them some sort of wooden idol.
That's right.
Right? The Herodians want it to be a kingship of a person on a throne that can sort of be their long-awaited human, savior.
Yeah.
And the Pharisees are dragging the law with them and saying, if we are just a holy people, then we will be unique and set apart, and we will be God's righteous people. And both of them come to Jesus and say, now what about taxes? And Jesus essentially says, you guys are carrying with you these wooden idols. Like,
that's right.
But we have to set it in the proper perspective.
Yeah.
Let's turn to the gospel.
Yep.
It's such an interesting text, one that I think probably, I'm guessing for you who are watching at home, some of you have heard this text before. Paul, how do we hear this text interpreted? What are some of the ways that Jesus' words of give to Caesar that which is Caesar and God's what is God's, how is that often interpreted?
So sometimes it's set up as the world is a dualistic place.
Sure.
Where there's an earthly realm and a heavenly realm, and you got to do what you got to do on earth.
Civic duty, religious duty.
Yeah. They're separate. They never shall they mix. And it's like, okay, you do what you got to do in the civic, but the spiritual, that's what's really going to matter. And so oftentimes you'll hear Christians preach this text this way and talk about it that way. That hey, there's a realm that you kind of got to put up with while you're waiting for the real realm to take over.
Yeah.
And so that's one way. Other ways is it's been used to denounce paying taxes to a government.
Right.
And it's been used to back paying taxes for a government.
Yes. We do love taking the Bible and bending it to how we want to read things. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what I'm struck with, a couple things capture me right off the beginning. First, it's the disciples of the Herodians and the Pharisees who are sent, right? The Pharisees went and plotted, verse 15, plotted to entrap him in what he said, so they sent their disciples to him. Like, these are not the elder statesmen of these two groups. These are the young blood, right? These are the people who are like, they're the ones writing the blog posts, and they're the ones who are kind of on the cutting edge, and it's like, hey, you guys go ask him, right? Like, we have plausible deniability. If you guys go out there and, and he makes a fool out of you, then we'll be like, oh gosh, these young people these days, right?
That's right.
So they sent their disciples.
That's cute.
That was the first thing that struck me. The second thing, you pointed this out in your sermon, that, Herodians and Pharisees, these weren't like people who hung together.
No.
Like, when you see Herodians and Pharisees coming to you together to ask you a question, like, if you're Jesus, you're just like, oh, this is going to be good.
Yeah.
Like, what are you two doing together,
Well, and then they are unified in their initial words towards him.
Yes.
Oh, whether they're kind of...
Sure.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
Yeah, what's behind those words, whether they're giving some sort of head nod to like, yeah, something's here, we're not sure what, and there's a sincerity and integrity. At least you are what
Sure,
we
that's
see
right.
is what we
That's
get.
right.
It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Or if they're just trying to be really
Butter 'em up.
smarmy and buttery up, and it's like,
We don't know. I think I tend to interpret it as being honest.
Yeah.
Like, they're disciples, they've been taught by their teachers how to show respect. But many commentators point out that they're probably just buttering Jesus up and like making him feel good before they get to their real question.
which, if you know anything about Jesus, it never
Doesn't work.
fall for something like
Doesn't
that.
work.
It's like, what?
Okay, so then you talked about the coin. You even showed a picture of the coin, which I think is so great to see what that coin would have looked like. And it would have been really interesting to have that coin as a visible thing there. We have ones in antiquity now,
Right.
but they certainly have aged. But to have one freshly minted,
Sure.
right, and just been like, oh, it's right there.
Clean. Yeah.
Tiberius, son of Augustus, son of the divine,
Yeah.
high priest.
Yeah,
I thought
on
that
the
was
back.
just really struck, especially in Judaism. The tax, I think so the coin would have been used to pay a tax that would have come on harvests and personal property. It would have been determined by registration in the census. We have a corresponding text in Luke's gospel of people going to be registered
Right.
so that there could be better taxation. So harvests, anytime you had something good and you sold it, you had to give some, and importantly, it was administered. Though it was required by Rome, it was administered by your fellow Jewish citizens who would come to you and say, I'm the tax collector, right? Think about Zacchaeus or some of these others, right, who would come and collect that tax from you, and they always took more than what was required, and it was often the burden fell on those who were already poor or oppressed in the lower class of strata of society.
And them taking more than what was required was part of the system.
Absolutely.
That's how they made their living.
That's right.
So it's like, all right, there's going to be a tax on the tax in order
Yeah.
to support me.
So Jesus is stuck because he says, yes, pay taxes. Then he's alienating the very people who he's come to liberate, right? The oppressed and the poor. Right. If he says, no, don't pay taxes, then everyone's ready to accuse him of sedition against Rome. Yeah. And that never ends well for Judea or Jerusalem.
Revolutionaries never made it too far.
They did
Rome.
not. So I want to just tick through a couple other things about this and then see if there's anything you wanted to add. Mm-hmm. One, in tackling the question, I think Jesus embraces what we might consider to be the mundane. There are lots of groups out there who, as you said, would interpret this text to mean, let's just go off by ourselves, away from everybody, and contemplate the heavenly realm, forget the earthly realm, right? It's bound for destruction. We don't need to take part in it. We don't have any obligations here. We'll just go and think about God's kingdom, right? And in Jesus' day, that group was called the Essenes. Sure. They retreated to the desert. They did lots of intense mystical fasting and prayer and writing, but they didn't really take part in the day-to-day operations. So for Jesus to not dismiss the question, right, for him not to say, you know what, forget it, don't pay taxes, we just need to hunker down and imagine God's realm, right?
Just wait, hold on a little bit
I think
longer.
Jesus embraces the mundane operations of the world in a way that says, look, this isn't going to be perfect, but it is a mechanism that we have an obligation to be a participant in.
That's right, and I think that's why I gave some tacit scriptures that I think were implied in there. That Psalm 24, I think, is one. If the earth is the Lord's,
yes,
then everything matters.
Yes,
and if all the people who live in the earth are the Lord's, then everyone matters, and what we do together matters. And so there's a give and take in our relationships in our life together, whether it's government and governed or neighbor to neighbor. It's like, okay, we're in this together because we belong to to the Lord. So
Yes.
the mundane is elevated to be, hey, this is the life God created us for.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
Jesus' question, as you pointed out, is really about his statement, give to God the things that are, or no, his question, whose image is this and whose inscription?
Right.
Like, is really a question about himself
Yeah.
for the Christians in the church that were reading this.
Sure.
Right? Like, because whose image is almost Jesus pointing like, whose image is this?
Yeah.
And whose inscription is saying Son of God?
That's right.
Like, it's me, right? Like, so the idea of this back and forth about Caesar is kind of pointless because it's really about Christ.
It's really about Christ. And that's where Matthew sets it up for that in the preceding chapters. From the moment he comes into Jerusalem, it's about authority, and that's answered through sonship, through
Yes.
the parables, and through this. And even the next question, I think, the Sadducees come
Yes.
to him with, it's about sonship. There's a woman who's married, never has a son.
Yeah.
Well, then who's she really married to?
Right.
And Jesus says, wait, wrong question. And we're out of time.
Hey,
Sorry.
man, we slid into that one.
I didn't see
Okay, so in your house churches or by yourselves or in your families, we have resources for you today that talk more about this gospel text. You can learn more about some of the interesting background and historical framework for it. And you'll be talking about some of the contemporary loyalties and powers that we are in tug of war with. And it will be fascinating, especially given all of our current political world, for you all to have those conversations and think about those things. So go in peace. We will look forward to seeing you back either on daily prayer this week or next Sunday on our live stream. Go in peace.